Hey compañeros, Carlos Ochacon here with a podcast extra for episode 91 of the SQL Data Partners podcast. In episode 91, we had some of the team from the DBATools.io come onto the program and talk to us about what the tool is, how they got it started, and how we as DBAs can start taking advantage of some of the PowerShell functionality that everybody else in the Windows environment is taking advantage of, but has been a little bit slow to come to SQL Server. And so the DBATools team has put together some pretty powerful packages that will enable you and I to do our jobs just a little bit easier. And so we discussed that. And so that episode is available at sqldatapartners.com/DBATools. So I hope that you'll check out that full conversation. In this podcast extra, I invite Constantine Kokkinos back onto the program, and we're going to kind of go through a visual component of how you'd get started with the DBA tools. One of the things that you'll begin to notice by going to the site and beginning the download process is that it's a very, very wide tool. It can do lots of different things. And so you may not know in the beginning, which was my case, of where exactly to start. And so Constantine shares some of his thoughts on how to get started. You may not know a lot of PowerShell. That's okay. We're going to give you some ideas or some thoughts on how you can get in there, start collecting some information, kind of get your toes wet, if you will, and then move from there. As Constantine and I recorded, unfortunately, our video feeds didn't come over. So I do apologize for that, but you can see the screen that he shares, and that will be good for this discussion. Of course, if you are using the DBA tools and have other thoughts or guidance, you can leave comments here, or I'm sure the DBATools.io folks will also be interested in hearing from you, and we hope that you'll reach out to them if you haven't already. One of the things we do talk about is the Slack channel that's available. It's free, it's open to everyone, but you do have to sign up for it, which you can find at dbatools.io/Slack. So thanks again, Constantine, for coming on, and compañeros, I hope you enjoy this podcast extra.
Where do you get started? How do you break that apart? And when you first are looking at the DBA tools page, you will see a significant amount of commands.
Right.
This will only grow as well. Now, there's going to be some shrinking, some changing.
Yeah, some consolidation a bit. Yeah.
Exactly. But PowerShell it's not SQL, basically, is the simplest way to put it. And as a DBA working in SQL primarily, you have, select, update, insert, delete. Maybe you use a merge if you're getting fancy or something like that.
There's syntax, there's a structure around it, right?
Exactly, and you dive very deeply into that syntax. With PowerShell, I find I am, a water bug skipping on the surface much of the time.
Gotcha. And again, I want to back up just for a second to say that's one of the reasons why I wanted to chat with you, kind of this, this podcast extra. When you mentioned, well, I'm not really a PowerShell guy, right? Kind of DBA first, and then I decided to kind of dip my toe in here. I think that's where I find myself in that camp as well, and I think the majority of the people listening are going to be in that same camp as well.
To be honest, I think it's one of the best ways to take advantage of all of the amazing PowerShell work that has been done in the DBA tools module. I often find myself sitting in our Slack channel, SQL Community Slack. You can sign up at sqlps.io/Slack. People will come and ask questions who I consider, titans of the DBA world, and most of my answer to them isn't knowing something. It is going to our source code and then searching for something and then learning something a lot of the times. And when I first started joining the DBA tools channel, that's actually kind of what my plan was join, try to answer any question that a person had, because I don't have the answer to that question. And by the end of that journey, hopefully, I will have something new. I will know something useful.
Right.
And
taking that adage, right, the best way to learn something is to teach it.
Absolutely. I was a technical trainer for a few years, and I learned the material better than anyone I knew, even people doing the work, because they would ask weird questions, and I would have to figure out the answer.
All right.
So with a lot of these commands, they have a very specific form, and even though PowerShell is a lot more broad than SQL commands generally. They actually have a very opinionated way of the verb-noun matching. So you'll see a lot of gets, a lot of sets, a lot of removes, a lot of renames. This is not because we are amazing at organization. This is because PowerShell says, hey, that's not an approved verb. Don't do that. If you don't mind, I actually want to take you over and kind of show how I deal with that complexity, which is trying not to at all, basically.
Sure.
And maybe show off some commands that I found super useful when I started and actually have been added since I started.
Please do.
Cool. Great. So I've added some comments here, maybe too many comments, but I was having fun. And really I wanted to demonstrate to you.
And let's say even back up to even just a step further, right? Because so you're using the PowerShell IDE.
Integrated scripting environment. Yep. It comes with PowerShell, I think one of the default installs. It's not going to be on Core, Windows Core or anything like that. But otherwise you should just be able to type PowerShell ISE and it's going to come up 9 times out of 10.
There you go.
At the top of the screen here, I put the import module command, and this really is just kind of the let me get at all of the delicious DBATools commands. So if you run this, and you can put this anywhere in your code, I hit the little run only this selection, as DBAs are wont to do. So there's a couple ways to get DBATools. Just go to dbatools.io/download. It'll talk you through them because there's a couple of different methods depending on what OS, what version of PowerShell, etc. It's super easy. We have pretty much a one-line answer no matter what OS you're on, but it's probably not worth going over.
Yeah, I was using Windows 10. I found it very easy just to start that, that import module almost just like that, and I could get going and ask me a couple of questions. I had to run it as administrator. That was the only tricky thing, if you will. But other than that, yeah, I was in and I was good.
What I wanted to kind of start with, and really the things that I wish I knew the first day of working with PowerShell, actually starts with get help. And get help is a command built into PowerShell that searches all of the PowerShell help files that you have at your disposal. And even better, it'll actually allow you to throw wildcards in. And because of the incredibly strict nature of PowerShell naming, you actually get really good results instead of very weird names. So for instance, if I wanted to find out if any degree of parallelism topics were available, and I ran that, it will actually return the name, the category, and the module that this is in. So we see set DBA max stop and test DBA max stop, which if you're looking at your farm of servers and you want to see, did I actually set all the max stop correctly? Did I put that in the way I expect? It's very easy to iterate over your whole, farm and find out that information. And get help has a little more than just the basics. My favorite of any type of help is an example. I really work well if I can look at some code and understand what is this trying to accomplish. So almost every PowerShell help file has numerous examples with here's what it's doing, here's how it works, and really you can often copy and paste this exact code. And I know this demo works because this was written against this environment. And we can pick, hey, set recommended max stop for all settings on SQL Server 2016. In 2016, you can actually have database-specific degree of parallelism. So
that's right.
Cool stuff.
One of the new features.
Yeah, pretty impressive stuff outside of DBATools there. And even if you wanted additional help or you wanted more breakdowns, this -full operator really will break out everything that you want. And I'm going to open a new PowerShell tab because it's still running that command against all of my servers. That's what I get for running a demo.
Yeah. Well, now, I guess a question I had going back to that other command is, how are you say to set it, but where does the actual value that you're changing it to get set? Are you going to show us that?
Actually, that was totally an off-the-cuff example,
Okay.
but that is a great question because a lot of that boils down to, well, there's another parameter for that particular command if you don't pass it the value. But the example there, the help example said specifically that it would do it based on best practices. And so set the recommended. Maxed out. So what actually happens when you see one of those examples is we have reached out to the community. We have usually gone to MSDN, we've gone to SQL Help, we've talked to some of our various SQL wizards and really gotten those best practices baked into the command. One of the biggest benefits to me as a DBATools contributor and just general user is I don't have to know I'm correct. I don't have to generally spend all this extra research time because it's been done already and it's baked into this code. So I kind of give that away to the community and they maintain it for me and it's really good as a result.
There you go. That's kind of an extension of some of the things Aaron brought up, right? Is that there is that code review. You have lots of, pretty smart people looking at it, and it's not just one or even two people kind of making these decisions. Even those who are not part of DBATools get input into the tool set because you're reaching out to them for, hey, what should these defaults be and whatnot.
So it's really important that anyone who notices any problems or has additional knowledge, even if it isn't PowerShell, to just raise an issue on GitHub or come to our Slack channel. I was just hearing some feedback on Twitter yesterday, and I asked the person, hey, do you want me to raise that bug? And within 5 minutes, had another person saying, oh, here's some more information who is not even involved in that conversation. So it's great, frankly, that piece of getting that community feedback and baking it into our code. So yeah, I was going to just kind of demonstrate a couple other commands, especially if you're new to PowerShell or want to start breaking into this. You can really use most of these commands with very little additional information or understanding of all the kind of magic. So I have a couple of examples here. Get DBA last backup, get DBA last good check DB, test DBA disk alignment, the one I was just talking about, and find DBA stored procedure. And really I have a SQL instance, not necessarily required to put the parameter dash parameter here, but I like calling it out, makes it very clear what's going on.
Sure.
And then my instance name is SQL 2014, really creative there.
Good demo name.
Yeah, oh yeah. I'd love to name them interesting things, but then no one would know what it would do.
Right.
So very simply, running this command is probably something that you have in your environment or something similar, saying, hey, are my backups out of whack? When was the last time that happened? And get DBA last backup provides a pretty straightforward set of properties. So it's like, hey, you're on this server for this database, for this recovery model. When was the last backup, and what type of backup was that? How long has that been? When was that database created? Is your database offline or in some scary mode? So really basic and useful information, and pretty much each one of these commands falls under that category. So get your last good check DB. And we have a slightly different form here. I have a little example about that, but you can see again, here's our server, here's our databases, and oh no, our last good check DB is quite a while ago and non-existent for some of our databases. Probably something we need to resolve. I included this one because I just talked about it, and it tries to offer fairly straightforward information. So pretty much, do you have a best practice configured file system or not? Really on a VM, this is probably not that useful anymore, but some people are still running physical storage.
But I think it is interesting, right? Like a great way to kind of get started with some of the things is just start on the reporting components, right? Rather than trying to make broad brush changes to the environment, it's just like, you know what? I don't want to change anything. I just want to get information back. Let me start reading it. Let me get used to the formats, to the nomenclature, right? I can use the example files that you set up, that you showed, for example, and then say, okay, now I feel a little bit more comfortable, right? Maybe I, create a demo environment or my development, environments. Okay, now let me go and try the next thing, right? And see how it works, right? See what blows up, whatever.
And if you stick to the get commands, you won't have any problems with changing state. So you can safely run a get command against your server and not be worried, oh, is something going to change? Am I going to screw something up? Obviously, if you're running it against hundreds of servers or doing very interesting type of parameters, you could potentially issue a query that's expensive, just like any query.
Sure.
But everything pretty much either fits into, we're running a SQL query because all of the server management objects, the SMO library, boils down to run a query against a server.
Right.
Or in some very rare cases, checking the registry, finding some information like, your current configured backup folder or something like that, which is the same way SMO does it in the first place. I also wanted to say, if you start looking at this stuff and you start saying, well, I want to manipulate this, I want to start changing things, or I want to get a little more power than one server, you have a lot of options. So we did the check last good, DB last good check DB, but if you noticed, we had quite a few missing, not very good. What I've actually added here is a pipe, and this is something that is familiar if you've done bash stuff before or any languages that really support pipes. I only know bash. And it's really kind of a strong suit of PowerShell, which is to kind of say, I have a good command, it does something useful, now I want to send those results to something else, and I want it to do additional things. Maybe I want to filter, maybe I want to sort, maybe I want to do all those things we would do in an order by or a where clause. And in the case of DBA last good check DB, but in this case, our friend null, where last good check DB doesn't exist. And we can see these are all the list of databases that we don't have a check DB on. This would be, danger zone, basically.
Right.
And I don't like living in the danger zone. So having that information is very useful, but doing it one at a time is really a pain in the butt. And to be honest, just like I typed and failed at typing my server name, you really want to remove as much human error from your automated scripts as possible.
You want it to be repeatable. You want it to be just ready to roll, right?
Exactly. The perfect word, repeatable, and really just no humans involved. So one thing you can do is, instead of doing one server at a time, actually pipe the list of servers to your commands. So in PowerShell, you define a list with this little syntax at open paren, and you have your comma to separate your items. And so all I really have is two words, SQL 2014, SQL 2016, two strings. But because our command supports piping, I can actually run this, and it will hit both SQL 2016 and SQL 2014 and output all of the results, which is super slick, honestly. If I wanted to even add an additional pipe, there's a great command called export CSV, and I'm like 90% sure that folder doesn't exist, so I'm not even going to run that right now. But we can take this interesting output and just output it to a useful file, something for some human to review, something for auditing purposes, really whatever we want to do that will allow us to build systems instead of just get outputs to a console. I added some additional stuff there, but it's not that you have to absolutely use these other parameters. It's more that they make your life a little bit easier. Let's run our command. Now, if everything went correctly, we should, there we go, start seeing a CSV populating. We're still waiting on some of the results coming back, but, I'll break it, whatever.
Well, I think the other kind of neat thing here, taking advantage of that, I want to say looping, but basically connecting to more than one database at a time. That's another one of the great things you hear about PowerShell is like, oh, you can just iterate over all of your instances. But setting up that logic there, again, for me, it was a larger step than I was able to overcome, and being able to kind of capture to say, hey, you guys that know what you're doing have figured all that stuff out, just put it in a way that I can access it. Super beneficial as well.
So there are some times where pipelines or passing that information isn't supported, and generally you can always use the for each command. So the DBA last good check DB does not actually currently support the pipeline. It will. Pretty much that's our goal for all of our commands here. But when that fails, you can pass it the same thing. And basically I said, hey, for each server in my list, get the last good DB, pass it the server, and then where the last good check DB doesn't exist. And so this is the, oh crud list from my entire farm. Obviously, it's going to take a minute to go through it, but that's kind of the basics, whether you're going to define some of your stuff, your servers, what commands you could run on it, and then really getting into the help. You're going to know more about what you want to do. And to be honest, most of the commands, besides the core set, were driven by some member of the community saying, man, wouldn't it be nice if I could blah.
Right. I have this problem to solve, right?
Exactly. And I enjoy programming, but I enjoy problem solving a lot more. I enjoy figuring out what people want to do. And so, my biggest contributions to DBATools have not been a new command. It's actually been, hey, we have this weird bug and we don't know why it's happening and it's really hard to reproduce. I'm like, oh, this sounds fun. I'm going to figure this one. And really the last command I wanted to show off, you can see here our results from our everything that needs a check DB, and don't worry, this is all demo environments.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've got some work ahead of you there, Constantine.
This is actually the DBATools test environment. The last thing I was going to show off was I'm actually not even going to run because Chrissy might be mad if I reset some SQL servers, but when I first came into my current position, a lot of the questions came around, what databases do we even have, or what are the state of those databases, or can you even log into that server, and what is that for? Does anyone even know? And the last command that's really useful in that sense, for me at least, was reset SQL admin, which if you've been in DBA long enough, you've had to go and reset the service account password and get it and break into your own SQL server or someone's SQL server. But this makes it super simple. Literally typing the instance name and running it will set you as the SA and you will be in it. It will require, it will restart the instance, it will set it into single user mode, it will do all of those techniques to basically make sure that you are now logging into a SQL server. So super nice set of, these are really annoying and complicated to do as a normal DBA, and when you do it in PowerShell you just go, man, maybe I should learn a little bit more about this. So that's why I wanted to show it off.
Well, awesome. Constantine, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate the guided tour.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, let me know if you ever want to talk more.